It's Patriot from Patriots Public Opinion. And man, today's video I just want to talk about, a subject that I've never really explained. I talk a lot about veteran stuff, street politics and things like that. Basically things I've spent my life around, and how I feel about them, why they're important to me, all these kind of things. But I guess one thing I never really explained is, what made me join the service in the first place, what made me want to be, a member of the military and all of that. Everybody has their own reasons, man. Everybody. Something has to drive you and push you to be in there and succeed, even if it's just for a term, do a whole career or whatever else. But I was born December 21st, 1989. I was born in the Midwest, in Nebraska, which is a place that, most people in the world probably don't know about. And if you do, you know that it's a very, Nebraska has cities. It's got places like Omaha and Lincoln and Kearney, but a lot of Nebraska is rural America and farms and blue-collar workers and, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of patriotism, a lot of being raised proud of being American, a lot of, veterans all over the place in your families and things like that. And I grew up with quite a legacy in my family. I had one great-grandfather who was from Czechoslovakia, and he'd been in World War I. He was a trench soldier. I had another great-grandfather that came from Ireland, and he enlisted in the Navy in World War II, and then ended up being in Pearl Harbor, of all places, during the attack, and then actually fought in North Africa. My father had been in the Army. He'd been a 75th Ranger. Great uncles that were Korean War, Vietnam War. My dad had been in the era of like the end of the Cold War, going into Desert Storm, And then the late 90s, say 96 to 99, kind of that time, my uncle had joined the Navy. He ended up with a serious injury, so he wasn't able to stay. My aunt joined the Marine Corps, and she did, I think it was like 8 years in the Marines, but it was pretty serious. She was a real good Marine, I grew up with this legacy of heroes all around me, this idea of what it was to be an American and the pride you were supposed to have in that, right? So 6th grade, right? Sitting in class one day, Mr. Schaefer's classroom, Tecumseh, Nebraska, small town, man. My dad had been through a divorce, and we'd come back to where his parents lived, which is actually an hour away from the town I was born at, Pawnee City, Nebraska. My dad was in Tecumseh, my mom was in Pawnee in high school when they met. But small town, I think there's like 12 people in my whole class, which back then was a big deal. You know what I mean? But 6th grade, and I remember we had a couple different teachers that would come in through the week to teach different things, right? There was one teacher that would teach reading and poetry on like Wednesdays. We had Mr. Vertiska, I'll never forget him, because he's like a Bill Nye the Science Guy type guy, but he taught us all our science and, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was different than how school is now, And Mr. Vertiska, he come running in the classroom, and he's shaking up and he's breathing heavy, and it's just, you don't see him that way a lot. We weren't used to it, and he told us, he said, there's been this terrible accident, He tells us, he says, the Trade Center in New York City, he says an airplane, it accidentally crashed into the Trade Center, and a lot of people are hurt, but this is big news. And he said this is something that you guys should all learn. You know, it's something you guys should see. This is going to be a historical moment. But he believed truly, as a lot of people did back then, that it was an accident, you know. So he turns on the TV, and, you know, at the time, I didn't even know what the World Trade Center was. I had no idea, you know, what a terrorist was, where the Middle East was, the countries in the Middle East, nothing. I was a kid, man. You know, the greatest ambitions that I had in my entire life was getting through my school year to get to the next summer and fuck around with my friends and growing up to be a Jedi Knight. You know what I'm saying? But, dude, I didn't know anything about the world, you know. And the only thing I knew about war and the military was what I knew about my family, you know. So obviously we're watching what's going on, and a little bit into watching it in the 6th grade classroom, you know, the second plane hits. And then a little bit farther into it, you know, we hear about the Pentagon, you know. And it just, obviously people woke up to the fact that we were being attacked, right? And that this wasn't something that, you know, was an accident, and this was a real attack. People start talking about the Middle East and bin Laden and Al-Qaeda taking responsibility for the attacks and all this. And like I said, I had no idea what any of this meant. None. You know? And the closest thing that I could compare it to is the stories of my grandfather, and, you know, when the morning he woke up in Pearl Harbor and the attack began. But this was obviously on much more of a massive scale, and even though civilians died in Pearl Harbor, this was like a complete attack on civilian society. I remember not really understanding why as a kid, but I was angry. I was hurt, you know. I remember crying, sitting in that classroom with tears leaking down my face and feeling like, man, I don't want to get made fun of, you know, by all the other boys, my friends in this class, and I better wipe these tears away. And I reached my hand up to wipe a tear off my face, and I'm looking around the classroom, and everybody in that classroom was crying. The teachers, the other students, everybody, because we all realized the world changed. Something was different, you know. I said I didn't understand the politics of the world or who these people were or anything like that, but I knew for whatever reason these people hated us. I didn't understand why they hated us, but they hated us. They did this horrible thing. I watched on TV people, fellow Americans, die. My country was attacked and hurt. And I knew that this was a massive, world-changing, catastrophic event. Everything was going to be different from this point forward, right? So my dad used to be an amazing person at just conversation and making you think and making you go over your own reasons in your own head, you know. That night, he took me across the street to the school basketball courts. It used to be our thing. We'd shoot basketball, throw the football, hit the baseball, whatever, you know. And we're playing basketball, and probably for about 30 minutes, you know, we're just shooting around. It's quiet, you know. We're not talking, we're shooting around, just hanging out. And I remember that my dad put his hand on my shoulder after I shot a basket, and I turned around, and my dad asked me, he said, "What do you think about what just happened?" I told him, I said, "I'm not really sure, but I'm really mad." My dad said, "That's okay. It's okay to feel that way." He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I think so." He said, "Well, what are you thinking about?" And I told him, I said, I want to grow up and go into the military, and whoever these people are, for whatever reason they did this, I said I want to do my part, and I want to fight this tyranny and this evil, and you know, help avenge my country. You know, my dad hugged me. He said, "You're in 6th grade." He said, "You got a lot of things to worry about before you get there, you know, and but I love you and you're a good kid, right?" We went on playing basketball that night, and then slowly but surely, you know, the days went on and the world normalized or got back to whatever the new version of normal was, you know. And I remember, you know, for some reason though, that conversation never left my mind. That imagery sitting in that classroom, it didn't leave my mind. And there was a few things from that point forward that, you know, always stuck with me. I remember the early days coming home, every time you turn on the news channel, this many soldiers, this many Marines, this many, you know, Americans killed in the Middle East, you know, at this war, you know, it's daily, you know. There was a teacher in my school that her son had gone off, and, you know, he fought. I think he had 4 or 5 tours. By the time he was done, he was real messed up, screwed up, you know. Started seeing older kids, you know, dudes that are in high school that we knew about that enlisted, and a couple of them died. You know, we saw them come home in town and bury them, you know. And so it's like life went on, and I kept doing what I was doing. I mean, I went and got in trouble and, you know, got involved with the streets after we moved out of that town and moved to the city, you know. Like I've explained a lot, and got some legal trouble and all that shit. But through everything that I was doing as a dumbass young kid, that day never left my mind, you know. So for some reason, when I was 20 years old, I failed out of college. I couldn't make the rap thing work. My relationship was going to shit. The only good thing I had in my life was a brand new baby, my first son. And everything else was just fucking shit, dude. And so for some reason, all that stuff that I'd held on to for all those years came back into my head, and I said, you know what? I should join the military. So April 27th, 2010, I enlisted in the Army, man. And never looked back, you know. Never regretted my decision. I think that as soon as I finally went, felt like destiny, man. It felt like that was my place, you know. I feel I've done some things in my career that I have to be proud of, and I think I've done my part, you know. Obviously, I learned as well, you know, not everything is always what it seems. You know, there's a lot of things portrayed a certain way that when you get in the military, you find out are different. When you get over there, you find out are different, you know. But ultimately, I think I did what I set out to do, you know. Now I'm sitting with 8 years to retire while I'm sitting in the National Guard, and it's crazy looking back and remembering all that. And there's guys in the military now that weren't even born when 9/11 happened. I talked to one guy in the Army who probably enlisted like 4 years ago. He was talking about 9/11 in history class, right? But it was something he wasn't around to see. I remember sitting in that classroom and watching the world change that day. But that's my story. That's the reason that I joined the military. It's just something I felt like, you know, I would discuss and explain. So anyway, have a good night. Catch you guys on the next one.